Hello and welcome to More Than a Game, a podcast about the A-League, Premier League and more. My name's Tommie C, and today we've got a massive lineup of Sydney Derby, Champions League semi-final first legs, business as usual in the Premier League for City and Chelsea, More Than a Game FPL prizes and Survivor tipping prizes. Oh, and nil-all draws in the A-League. You betcha, we've got three. So after the late scratching of Damo, Shanen joins us again on More Than a Game. Welcome, mate. How are you this morning, this afternoon?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me back again.
No, it's a pleasure. Just great to have another passionate football fan on the pod. Look, plenty of football to cover. Like I said, plenty of nil-all draws in the A-League. Should we just get straight into what your moment of the week was, though?
Yeah, my moment of the week. I love a bit of the shithousery on social media, and when Scott McDonald signed for Wanderers, my circle's mostly Wanderers fans, and they're all doom and gloom. So my moment of the week was Scott McDonald scoring what turned out to be the winner in the Sydney Derby to just kind of shut those fans up straight away.
That was fantastic, wasn't it? Because I think a lot of Raw fans were kind of happy to see him go as well. They were like, oh, well, he wasn't really playing. It was a bit like Georgievski, how he wasn't playing. He was probably on big money. It's probably better to just get rid of him. But yeah, for him to pop up and score an important goal like that means a lot for probably for him, but also the fans too. So good stuff there. Anything else?
Oh well, it's been one of those things. Another one with the Sydney Derby was it was just good to see, what was it, 20,000 fans there, chanting, singing, all that sort of stuff. It was one of those things we've been missing for a good year and a half, 2 years since COVID and all that sort of thing. It felt like good old A-League days back again.
I think like we've seen. I think there was 16,000 at the Melbourne Derby recently, but it didn't have the same feel as this because obviously the VAC aren't doing so well this season, so it didn't quite have that same spice about it. But yeah, wow, this was the A League really at its best, wasn't it? And
Yeah,
maybe
it's what you love to see.
we'll cover that in a little bit, I guess, a little bit more, after moment of the week and own goal. But for me, my moment of the week, I got two. The first one was Soccer Twitter Monopoly. Run these memes. He had been working on that, and I think it just sort of started out as a bit of a joke, and it ended up actually he just fully fleshed it out and turned it into a fully fledged Monopoly skin, I guess you could call it. And I think that's I think the ladies league are hosting that for him as a you can do use it as a free download or you can pay $3 I think it is, and they donate all of the money raised to charity, which is great. The other thing I had was, do you remember the Bulgarian FA? How we got sacked or resigned as a result of the racism incident there? I think it was involving the English national team, English men's national team. It was about 18 months ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, he's since rescinded his resignation and he's reappointed himself as the chief of the Bulgarian FA. What I love about this is not so much the fact that he's reappointed himself. I mean, that's real sort of Eastern European or sort of second or third world country sort of politics, right? But what I love is the time lag in him taking that action. It's been like 18 months, right? And it made me think of, like, say you've resigned from a job and you just like you've made the decision maybe a couple of years later that maybe it hasn't quite worked out how you might have thought, and instead you just walk back in and say, well, I rescinded my resignation 2 years later. I just love the shithousery of that.
It's like that Seinfeld episode. I think George Costanza gets fired, or
Yeah.
he resigns or something. Then he just turns up on Monday and pretends to act natural, like nothing happened.
Yeah, it's a good parallel, isn't it? All right, mate. As always, there's plenty of bad stuff that happens, or bad stuff that or good stuff that we don't really like that happens in the world of football. Though, what own goal do you have this week?
Oh, I want to give a shout out to Mango Gate. That was one of the
This is
most bizarre A-League stories I've heard.
this is incredible, isn't it? For those who weren't watching the M-Tag Derby, Brisbane Roar versus Wellington, walk us through it, mate.
So basically, a couple of tweets got put out saying that Brisbane Roar, the Den, the fan group there, were doing chants Mango's 2 for $5 during the match. And I'm all for the hustle. Like, good on you. Make your money however you do it, but wait till full time or something like that. Doing it during a match is just taking the piss a little bit, I think.
I know, right? And I mean, obviously, it ended up finishing nil all the game, but um, I don't think it was just a chant. Apparently, they were recording like a fully fledged ad or something like that. And I mean, part of it is, well, yeah, like you say, I respect the hustle too, right? And some people are just trying to make a living, and maybe the den's just trying to raise some money for some merch or something like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, like mid game, wow, like that's strange areas. I mean, the flip side of it is 3 for $5 for mangoes is a pretty bloody good deal, though.
Yeah, well, I guess there wasn't too much to talk about during that game except for the rain. So maybe they planned to do it after the game, but they were just pretty bored during the match, so they thought, why not get it over and done with now?
It's that's not a bad shout, you know. Maybe we'll have to start advertising mangoes on more than a game. Although I think to Queenslanders a mango is 4x.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know if
I've
I
never
don't
heard
know
that.
if that I don't know if that's just Steve Burby chat or if that's like an actual official nickname in Queensland for 4x.
Well, 3 for $5 is an even better deal then, if that's the
Yes.
case.
Exactly. I mean, like a mango, like an actual mango and a 4x is probably a pretty good Queensland combination, really. All right, mate. For me, like there were plenty of things this week, ranging from more than a game, just not doing an episode for a couple of weeks. That could be one own goal. Adama Traore, his red card decision and the associated suspension that's still not being finished. That could have been one. But I'm going to settle on the Super League. The fallout from that seems to have kind of fallen away into the background now. I remember there was lots of rage and lots of sort of supporter outrage about, and lots of pundit outrage as well from plenty of stakeholders about the European Super League and how they thought it was a bad idea. And then we started talking about what are the consequences for the greedy six in England, about what's going to happen with them. And we started talking about fines and points deductions this season's or next season, and it's all just gone very, very quiet. So that's my own goal this week. Anything else to add, mate?
It would be interesting to see if the fallout actually happened with that, because imagine the big six in England getting promoted, relegated down to championship, or people are even talking non-league. Can you imagine going to non-league football and seeing Manchester City play against some plumbers from Essex?
Hey, come on, put some respect on the plumbers that they played this week from Crystal Palace.
Oof.
Probably a bit harsh on Crystal Palace, but maybe not for this week though. Alrighty, mate. There were a couple of things that that caught our attention in the news this week. One was in the aftermath of that of the Woos pretty paltry crowd figures. Channel 10's The Project, they did a piece on the A League, which I mean sometimes any publicity is good publicity, but they did a bit of a project piece on the A League and how it's struggling at the moment after getting 990 fans at a game. Do you think 990 fans for a Monday night game between two of the lower rating teams at the best of times is probably about right anyway?
Well, it's the lowest in A-League history, so it's a bit disappointing. I mean, I guess it really goes to show that Western United don't really have an identity. They don't have a home ground, and they've been bouncing around between 4 or 5 different grounds. And this goes to show that they really don't have the support in Melbourne. But yeah, it seems like the project was just licking their lips and like rubbing their hands together, waiting for something negative to say about the A League, and they got it. And it is what it is.
Yeah, mate. I agree about I guess your earlier point about how this is really sort of rubber stamped the idea that the Woo have got like a fan base in the city. I think moving derbies to Amy Park or Saturday night games to Amy Park, maybe there's some potential in that, but weeknight games in Melbourne CBD at Amy Park or something like that is just not going to work. I think that is something that should not be repeated, and they really want to maximise how many games they're playing. I think at Mars or even at at Geelong, the GMHBA. Yeah, I think if they had played that game at Mars or GMHBA, I think they probably would have got a better crowd, even on a Monday night. Look, I agree somewhat about your point about the project were licking their lips and sort of just looking for a negative story to run about the A-League. But I've got to say, I think the general vibe of the segment was, I guess, of the untapped potential of the league, and sort of they had, I think it was Barry Cassidy who formerly of ABC. I think he used to be the host of Insiders, the political show, on a Sunday morning. He was kind of saying that, well, like he's a true believer, right? And he was saying that, well, if the A-League sort of gets it right and doesn't alienate all of those fans and tries to bring them back into the fold, it sort of can get back to its peak of a few years ago. But it really has to bring those fans back into the breach. So, whilst it's an easy thing to say, oh, just bring the fans back, it's much more difficult in practice, though. So, I think it was a story of frustration as much as anything. So. I mean, we're not really sure, I guess, how the APL is going to do things differently. We saw there was a pretty big police presence at the Sydney Derby, and generally speaking, I haven't heard of there being any major incidences. But I guess the NPL Sydney issue last weekend can show that it only takes one incident for everything to just sort of revert back to soccer, bloody soccer almost. Disappointing, I guess. But I guess it's a bit like everyone, really, as far as the A-League goes. Everyone knows that it has a lot of potential, but we just need to put all the pieces together. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the Raw exodus. Now, I'm not sure if you're following this, but obviously Scotty McDonald, he left, I think it was last weekend or midweek, turned up at Western Sydney Wanderers. But now, just breaking today or overnight, is that Jamie Young and Macaulay Gillespie, apparently they've fallen out with Warren Moon as well, and apparently they want to leave now too. Is the Raw squad sort of coming apart at the seams at the moment?
Well, if there's any basis behind the rumours that Jamie Young and Gillespie are leaving, that would be a huge blow for the Raw. Warren Moon, on paper, on what you see on TV, he looks like a pretty likable guy. But if there's deeper issues in the Raw and they lose, some of these key players, they could be looking at a really hard couple of years.
Yeah, man, 100%. I mean, Jamie Young has been there for a long time, and I know the Raw fans really love him. I think he's a good shop stopper, but otherwise a bit of a limited goalkeeper. If you ask some people, he's the best goalkeeper in the league, which, I mean, sort of blows my mind a little bit. But anyway, let's leave that there. And Macaulay Gillespie, I think he's sort of flown under the radar a fair amount as well. So it would be really a bit of a kick in the guts, I think, for the Raw to at this later stage to lose possibly some key players before the season even finishes. So it's a shame, I guess, we don't have Damo or Colby on the pod to be able to dissect this a little bit more, given that obviously they're very keen to see how this pans out. Mate, anything else on the Raw?
Well, there's not really too much more to say about it. We've covered it all. It was a pretty lackluster game they even had last week. They've been one of those clubs that have just been very, not so much under the radar, but very underwhelming. There's been a very underwhelming presence in the league this year.
It's funny, like I've spoken about Aston Villa and Everton this year in the Premier League as being a club that had sort of games in hand, and that they've if they win all their games in hand, then they'll go up to fourth place in the Premier League, and they can play Champions League next year. And I think the Raw are in a similar position now. I think they've got three games in hand at the moment. They've played 17 games and they're on 27 points, and because of how packed the A-League table is at the moment around that sort of second, there's 4 points between second and eighth, and so if the Raw manage to win all of their games, they can possibly shoot up to second. So it's actually no, they could go up to first. But hang on, sorry, City have got games in here too. But so it's hard to know sort of where a lot of the teams sit at the moment. Like I say, Raw could jump like way up the table if they manage to win some games in hand. So guess we'll just have to see how that all pays out, though. But all right, mate, let's jump into some A-League match week 19, though, shall we? First up, obviously the derby was the big game, and that took centre stage this week. Fantastic atmosphere in the Sydney derby. Sydney needed to catch up ground on City, while the Wanderers needed a win to go equal on points with the sixth-placed Western United. The Wanderers came out of the blocks quickest, and 2 goals inside the first 16 minutes gave Western Sydney an early lead. Bruce Kamau scored the Wanderers first, and he also played a major part in their second. Shanen, you could argue that he's turned a bit of a corner in the past month. Do you think it's too big of a shout to say he's one of the form players in the league at the moment? I mean, is he
no,
good enough to be
not.
Maybe even getting a Socceroos call up at the moment, or too soon?
I think it's a bit too soon for the Socceroos, considering the amount of talent we have, particularly in those wide areas. But he was one of those players who he was kind of wrote off last season or the season before as being one of those hit or miss sort of players. And you look at him at the first half of the season and you'd have to say, yeah, that's correct. But I don't know what's happened, but full credit to him. He has been absolutely electric. He's just been scoring goals. He's been creating chances. And every time he's on the ball, you think something's going to happen. It's very exciting to watch.
Bruce Kamau is a player that seems like he's been young for a long time, but he's 26 now. Like he's not a young player anymore. He's about to enter the prime of his career, and I mean, it kind of feels like he's done nothing for the last 5 years, which is incredible to say, but he's been very good lately. And it sort of coincided with a shift out from playing just as a winger, and he's been playing almost as like a number 10 or a bit of a roaming free role lately, which has been really interesting to watch. Right, so Sydney got one back after half time, but Scott McDonald, he rose to give restore the Wanderers 2-goal advantage on his Wanderers debut. Big goal, like you said, at the top, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just beautiful, and the fans, you could see they were full getting behind him as soon as he scored the goal. I don't know what they would have been like if he missed it, but I think Scott McDonald might end up being one of those cult hero sort of players for the Wanderers.
Well, scoring what turned out to be a winner in a derby is always going to be a shortcut to making yourself a cult hero, I think, at a club. And I mean, it did turn out to be a really fortunate time to score. I guess it did turn out to be the winning goal in the game, but it was also at a time when Sydney were just sort of starting to build up a head of steam. And they ended up going and getting the penalty just later, which Bobo skied. And then Caceres hit the crossbar as well. So I think if they hadn't have scored when they did, even if they had have scored maybe later on in the game or even earlier in the game, I think they would have lost the game.
Yeah, it was looking that way. You could see the momentum was totally shifting, and Wanderers scored almost against the run of play to kind of put it just out of Sydney's reach. Just on Anthony Caceres, I've got to say, he's got to be one of the most underrated players in the league, in my opinion. What he does on the ball, the way he goes, like he pulls his passes, he's defensively good. He can have a shot, he can dribble, but you never really hear him talked about as one of those sort of good midfielders of the league. You hear Braddon talked about a lot for Sydney, you hear Ninkovic and everyone like that, but I rarely hear people singing praises for Caceres. So here's me doing my TED talk saying how underrated Caceres is.
Did you rate him when he was at Melbourne City?
Yeah, I really did, but I was very shocked actually because I think it was just after he come back on loan from the Middle East or just before, but he played really good in the Middle East, and I was watching some dodgy streams. He looked electric, but when he was at City, he was kind of given the last 15, 20 minutes off the bench for most of his appearances. And I always felt
Nick Fitzgerald and him that were coming off the bench at the same time, which sort of indicates what the coach was aiming for, right?
I always felt like it was a bit of a waste because we seen little glimpses of it when he was at Central Coast Mariners, but I don't think he's been really given his fair shot to show what he's done in his whole A-League career, to be honest.
I think he's a bit of a unique player, and he reminds me a little bit of Nicky Carl as well. In that, like you can't play him as like a wide player or a winger or something like that because he just doesn't. I don't think he's got the pace for it. Whereas, like if he plays through the middle and sort of mimics the role that Ninkovic plays for Sydney, I think there is a role for him, and I think this Sydney team, the way they set up, I think is set up really well for a player like Ninkovic or like Caceres to be able to kind of move within the lines and find pockets of space for themselves. And the width is provided by the fullbacks. You've got a defensive base to build off of with the double pivot that Sydney play with, and it's a perfect scenario for them. But I think there's not many other clubs that are playing a system like that I think would actually suit Caceres.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And the thing is, Sydney's kind of set up to be mostly around Ninkovic. So you're not really going to drop Ninkovic and place Caceres. So he's kind of having to play second fiddle to him, which is a bit of a shame because we've seen last night that he has the talent.
Yeah, I think you could argue that he's had the talent. It's like we said, he's got to be able to be played in a scenario that benefits his strengths and sort of hides his weaknesses. Because I think you said that he was good defensively. Mate, big question marks for me over how good he is defensively. I think he's often been a little bit guilty of not always putting in a shift defensively, and similar to the way that some people sort of might have viewed Nicky Carl as being a bit of a liability defensively. I think you could make the same argument, I think, for Caceres, but
I'll agree to disagree on that one. I just think his positioning is really good, but yeah, he is a bit of a fraud defensively sometimes as well.
Maybe I think we'd love to hear from some Sydney fans or from fans of other clubs about what they think about Caceres as well. Maybe we'll put that one as a poll question on Twitter or Facebook over the next few days about whether Caceres is a fraud defensively or not. What else was there from the derby? So, look, the other thing that I guess that was great about the derby was that I mentioned before about in the Melbourne derby how it didn't feel like it had the same atmosphere, and not just from the crowd. I mean, on the pitch. This was a game that threatened to boil over a couple of times, really.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a Sydney derby where it hasn't had that feeling between the two clubs. You know what I mean? Whereas with the Big Blue. It didn't really feel like a derby earlier in the year with the Big Blue. With the Melbourne derby, it just felt like a game. But with the Sydney derby, even if it's one of those like 0-0 games, it always feels like a special game. Even before kickoff, you're always got that bit of adrenaline knowing you're going to watch something special. And I think that's what sets the Sydney derby apart from any other derby in the league, except maybe the distance derby, which we all know is we all know that's the best derby in world football, right?
Definitely the biggest derby. Mate, one question before we move on comes from Sam Borrachino on Twitter. He's got a question regarding safe standing at Bankwest. He wants to know, do you know if there was a reason with no COVID restrictions as to why the safe standing rails weren't brought back for the RBB this week?
That's a good question. Yeah, I can't think of an answer to that. Maybe they just, overlooked it. Maybe they forgot it. But yeah, I cannot think of an answer to that because, yeah, I'm just bewildered. I didn't even know it was a thing.
I wondered if that's probably the best way to put it for Bankwest to save face is that they just forgot.
Yeah.
Because if there's another sort of more sinister reason, then I'd almost prefer it to be that they just forgot.
Yeah, you'd hope they were just being a bit careless and overlooked it rather than some sort of anti-football propaganda that people are very quick to spew sometimes.
Especially after they made a big deal of the stadium is built for the Western Sydney Wanderers sort of in mind, and that it's built for safe standing and the rails and all that sort of thing. It'd be, really disappointing if they're just actively deciding not to use them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on though, shall we? The next game we're going to cover is Melbourne City hosting Newcastle Jets. It was first versus 12th In Thursday's game at Amy Park, 3 goals from Naboo, Jamison and McLaren gave City a 3-0 lead before Newcastle got one back to save a little pride in the 87th minute. This was pretty much business as usual for City, wasn't it?
Yeah, at times it looked like I was just watching Melbourne City do a training routine. They were pretty much just in the attacking half, just passing the ball between them freely. They just had some champagne gold color training cones that they were passing between, and it was a little bit boring at times just to watch that. You know what I mean? Because there was times where it just looked like, honest to God, it was just City passing it between each other.
They get into a really nice rhythm, and like you say, they just controlled the match really well. And I guess if anything, I think because Norbo, I think, would have been really annoyed that they ended up conceding late on, because that might indicate a bit of a loss of concentration. And I can't remember who it was who gave up the ball. I can't remember if it was Galloway or maybe Jamison, but yeah, I think he would have been really annoyed that they did end up conceding. It was good, actually, a pretty good goal, I think, by Gigakovic, a good finish through Tom Glover's legs. But, mate, one player who's come back from injury lately is Aidan O'Neill. He's been off for pretty much most of the season with I think it was a knee injury. What have you made of him since his return? Because he hasn't really played much for City even before that.
Yeah, you wouldn't have thought that he was out for about 4 or 5 months with injury, how seamlessly he's slotted into what is a very good Melbourne City side. And you know, you don't often see players, especially in these good clubs like Melbourne City, where you're surrounded by good players. You don't often see players who haven't really played there before come off a lengthy injury and just seamlessly slot into the midfield.
Mate, another player who is a bit of a prominent part of that Melbourne City midfield is Florent Berenguer. What have you made of him during his stay at Melbourne City?
I was a bit not too much sold on him in his first season at Melbourne City, but the more and more I watch Melbourne City, I think he's one of those underrated players who's doing a bit of the dirty off the ball work, while someone like Andrew Naboot, Craig Noon, Jamie McLaren, Luna, all those sort of players are getting the benefits from it. I think if City didn't have Berenguer, they would be a worse side, because for an more attacking sort of midfielder, he does a lot of that dirty work, chasing the high press, getting the ball back for these more attacking players. So I think, while I wasn't sold on him at first, I think he's really proven his worth to me.
Okay. And mate, the other question I want to ask you about City before we move on is about Tilio. When's he going to finally get a start? Because again, he was very good in this game as well.
Yeah, look, like last time I was on, you asked me that same question, and I said, you know, there isn't really.
When is City finally going to put some respect on Tilio's name?
Yeah, as I said, there isn't really much to lose by chucking him in. I just don't know why they haven't chucked him in yet, to be honest, because he's proving his worth off the bench. You know, every time he's been on, he's electric. But maybe they have that worry that he's one of those players who's only good off the bench, like Javier Hernandez. Otherwise, I can't think of why they haven't started him yet.
Tilio, the Chicharito of the A-League. Alrighty, mate. Let's move on though to the other game this round. The first one was the first of our 3-0 draws. Victor Sanchez was sent off early, but Adelaide couldn't take advantage. Mo Toure was also sent off late for 2 yellow cards, despite coming off of the bench in the 72nd minute. Do you think this is going to be the project's next episode, the A-League struggles with 0-0 draws?
Well, they might do that, but I personally thought this 0-0 draw between Western United and Adelaide was a pretty good one, despite the fact that it was 0-0. Not so much the other two, particularly the Perth one, but I thought this one was a pretty good game. There was a lot of feeling in it, a lot of heated moments. There was that particular VAR moment that I'm sure we're going to touch on a bit later as well. So yeah.
Well, mate, let's touch on it now, given you've kind of introduced it already. So Dylan Price was adjudged to have been offside by the VAR. And it was one of those things where, like, I've made a personal decision to not talk about VAR a lot because I hate it. Everyone hates it, and there's
Mm.
not many people that are still defending it, right? And I guess the frustrating thing about this one was that you looked at the positioning of the lines on the screen, and they didn't even seem to match up with the players. So, look, I'm not really sure what they were doing, what they were thinking, but I mean, it's just sort of hard to fathom how it's defensible anymore about how we've still got VAR in the league.
Here's how you know it was a really bad call. I'm in the Wellington Phoenix fan group, and Wellington Phoenix fans do not like Western United at all. They absolutely despise them. But the Phoenix fans were actually saying that they thought Western United were hard done by this. So that's how you know it's a bad call. And
Oof.
my thinking on VAR is if it's too close to call like this, if we're looking at it like microscopic millimeters like this, just stay with whatever the on-field call is. You know what I mean? If it's too close to call from VAR without seeing it straight away, stay with whatever the on-field call is and give it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I've said this a bunch of times before on the pod, and how in cricket with the third umpire, how they have that rule for LBW where if it's too close to call, they and because with LBW it's an imperfect science, right? Like you don't know exactly if the ball's going to go on and hit the stumps or not. So they basically just say, all right, stick with whatever the original decision was, and I think the A League needs to do something similar, especially with offsides, but. Yeah, for the fouls and the like, you could argue even that some of those have just been terrible lately. And I mean, football is it's a sport of interpretation, and it's not. We have very few black and white moments. So, pretty much, I think we all think that it should be limited just to goal line decisions now.
Yeah, I think everyone has the same sort of feelings towards VAR now after this weekend.
Mm. All right, mate. One final thing before we move on, like we'd already said about the 2 red cards, which did you think was the worst red card, Victor Sanchez or Moture's? Both were for 2 yellows.
I'm going to say probably Victor Sanchez because Motore is 16 years old. You know, he pretty silly to get into the push and shove and all that sort of thing to get the 2 yellows. But I'm going to give him a bit of an excuse because he's so young and inexperienced. Whereas Victor Sanchez, you know, he's a veteran of the game. He's been around long enough to know that if you're on a yellow, you're kind of walking that tightrope. What about you?
Yeah, mate, 100%. I thought Victor Sanchez should have definitely known better. I mean, you look at Victor Sanchez's 2 yellows. The first one was bringing down Halloran, which was probably one of those sort of tactical fouls, yellow cards where you go, yeah, it's probably better to take the yellow card. But the second one was for like that sort of late challenge where he just sort of body checked Dorigo through the back of him and thought for a player that's already on a yellow card that early in the game, you're just asking to be sent off. Whereas you compare that to Moture's 2 fouls. The first one was where he brought down Connor Payne, again another one that was sort of a bit of a tactical foul. But then his second one that he gets sent off for, he takes a bit of a bad touch and he tries to kind of chase it down. I'm not sure whether it's a block or whether he's trying to tackle Durante in the West United box, but a little bit of inexperience coming through there. I mean, I think Sanchez could even be double the age of Moture. I think if he's 32,
probably,
I'm not sure how old.
Probably
like
more
is
than
a
double
chance
the age.
Exactly right, and so I think Victor Sanchez, it wouldn't be surprised if he had a bit of a tough discussion with Mark Rudan after that, but obviously Moture will get a bit of a rest now, and maybe that's a good thing for him because he's played plenty of football this season, which has been great to see.
Yeah, and I don't think he would be committing silly fouls like that again after it as well.
Hopefully, he should learn a lot from the experience. Mate, the second of our 0-0 draws this time was Perth hosting the Glory. The Glory hosting the McBulls. Mate, probably the most significant thing about this game was the early kickoff. I think this was like a 1 p.m. kickoff in Perth. What did you make of that? Do you like the early kickoff time?
Not so much. I prefer those later in the night, kind of 5 o'clock, 7:30 games. That's just personal preference. I
I think
think the reason it was an early kickoff had something to do with them actually trying to get the ground in use due to COVID or something, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, I
okay.
personally didn't like it.
It's funny how we've been a bit sort of conditioned in Australia to not really, or at least in the last sort of 15 years, we're not really used to early kickoffs, and by early kickoff I mean like 3 p.m. I was a little bit sort of confused about sort of why we don't have more earlier kickoffs, and I know in the Premier League in the UK the midday kickoff is quite derided, and I know fans and players don't really like it, but apparently it's a pretty recent invention. Apparently midday kickoffs were introduced in, I think it was the 80s, in the UK, to discourage people getting hammered pre-game and then wanting to biff. So it was an anti-hooliganism sort of measure that was brought in the 80s, which is a nice little interesting bit of trivia. And it's funny because I mean, pretty much the later in the day you have it, the more likely people are to be absolutely wasted. And I guess maybe that's something that the A League needs to think about, is if you're having a 3 p.m. kickoff, does that mean that there's less likely to be a chance of crowd problems? Does that mean that there's less likely or a greater chance that maybe the police presences that we've seen at derbies and the like, that they may not actually be required? And it could be a one way, I guess, for like a bargaining chip for the A League to bring to some of these big games, and to talk to the police about and say, well, maybe let's have these games at earlier times, and that way we can sort of alleviate some of the police concerns about that. And that's about trying to come together with the police and some of the other authorities, and try to work out ways that everybody is happy with the outcome. Mate, the other big thing that came out of this game was Liam Reddy broke the record for the most A-League clean sheets, which is 86. Great for him, which also shows how long he's been around in the league for. Anything else from this game you wanted to mention, mate, before we move on?
Just touching on the crowd again, I wanted to say that I thought the Perth crowd was pretty lively, despite the fact that there was no shed due to those COVID regulations. And good on
Yeah,
them. It was an early kickoff. Good on them for still coming out, making some noise, and giving it a bit of atmosphere.
that is a good point, mate. I'd forgotten about the shed, how they basically, because I think there were a couple of COVID cases that were identified in Perth, so there was no shed in attendance, but I'm guessing all of the shed were basically just dispersed around the ground, which, I mean, yeah, okay, they're still going to be singing and the like, and maybe it actually made for a better atmosphere, because rather than all of the singing people sort of being concentrated in one area, it meant that they were spread out amongst the crowd. But good shout about the Perth crowd getting into the ground nice and early and making sure that they were in fine voice. Mate, the final of our A-League games to cover is and the third of our 0-0 draws. Midweek, there were some complaints that the season had been dragging on a little, so I'm guessing the Australian Premier Professional Leagues, they decided to turn this into a novelty water polo match. Another match where the ground was absolutely sopping wet. Mate, do you love or hate the conditions that were at Redcliffe on Saturday?
I mean, I love playing in it because I'm a pretty average player. I love to slide around and all that sort of thing.
You're a sloppy player, are you, mate?
Yeah. But to watch it, it's a bit like it's kind of fun to watch for about 5 or 10 minutes. But then when you see players playing passes that get caught up in a puddle and they stop dead, that would stop a really good play, it gets a bit frustrating. What about yourself?
Mate, I think you've summed up that really well. You're right. It is fun for about the first 10 minutes, whether you're watching or if you're playing. But I've got to say, in the 90th minute, when you are soaked to the bone, when you're playing or when you're watching these players and they're just absolutely slogging it around in the slop, it's just, mate, it just makes for pretty much unhappy fans and unhappy players probably. So a little bit unfortunate, but I guess this is going to be one of the things about if we're playing games in winter, we're going to see some of the pitches deteriorate a little bit if we get some runs of wet weather. And I guess we are quite fortunate that a lot of the grounds that the A-League play at do have very good drainage. Obviously, they've put a lot of work into some of those grounds over the last few years, but yeah, I think this is going to be something that we're possibly going to be seeing more of in the future rather than less of.
One thing I'm excited to see possibly in the future, if we stay in winter, is one thing I love to watch in European football is the snow matches. I don't believe we've ever had a snow match in the A-League, so I'm just excited for the fact that we could possibly have the first ever snow match in the coming years or even this year if we're lucky.
Maybe I think the closest we would have come to that was if the Labor government had won the overnight election in Tasmania, but I think they ended up getting 9 seats compared to the Liberals 12. So I'm not sure what a majority government is in Tasmania, but the Labor government had made a promise to basically to fund a rectangular stadium in Hobart if they won, but didn't happen. So I'm not gonna see a snow ground maybe anytime soon in the A-League. Little bit of politics chat for you there, bonus content, listeners. All right, mate. There's still one more game left in the A-League for this weekend. It's probably due to kick off in about an hour's time. Melbourne Victory versus Central Coast. Victory have conceded 12 goals in their past 3 games. That's obviously the derby, the 5-4 game against the Wanderers, and 1-0 against Sydney on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Central Coast haven't won in their past 4, 2 losses and 2 draws. What's your pick for this game?
I'm going to say possibly Melbourne Victory. This is an interesting game for me. It's probably the most interesting one of the round, despite the fact that we had a Sydney derby this round. Because Central Coast Mariners are kind of at that point where they've plateaued a little bit. And they haven't played poorly, but they haven't been able to capture that same magic, get those same results. Whereas Melbourne Victory, while their first win was a 5-4, which they nearly threw it away, to be honest, at the end. The game against Sydney FC, they did well to keep it 1-0, and they stayed in the match for pretty much the whole 90 minutes. So that could have been a turning point for Melbourne Victory. I know their new interim manager, Steve Keane, said he's not really fussed about whatever Tony Popovic wants next season. He just wants to get maximum points. So I'll be very interested to see how Melbourne Victory and Central Coast Mariners play this one out. What about yourself?
Man, I agree. I think this is going to be, I'm not sure if it'll be one of the best matches of the round, but it's definitely one that I'm most curious about because it's really on a knife edge. Like you're not really sure if the VUC are going to come out and be motivated or if Central Coast are going to sort of refine some of their earlier season form. I think you've hit the nail on the head about how the Mariners haven't been playing badly, but they have they've stopped getting the results that they were getting earlier on in the season. I guess maybe that sort of is a bit of a result of them playing sort of partly through emotion, and that was sort of getting them over the line in late in some of those big games earlier on in the season. So hopefully, I really want the Mariners to do well this season. So I really want them to be making finals, and if they continue this slide of games without a win, then they're a real risk of not making finals given how much they've sort of dropped back into the pack in the last month or so.
Which would be a shame.
100%. It would be a great story from this year if the Central Coast are able to make finals, I think. For me, I'm going to say a draw.
That's the safe option. Just sit on the fence.
Yeah, mate. Got splinters in my ass from sitting on the fence this week. All right. One final thing before we move on to the Premier League. Just want to do a big shout out to Matt Olsen for winning our More Than a Game Survivor tipping. I think we ended up going 7 or 8 rounds in this, so it really was Survivor tipping as such. And we promised a prize, and we've delivered. So Matt Olsen, he posted a photo this week of him with A-League Monopoly. So congratulations to Matt, and also commiserations to your friend's family or partner who's going to have to play it with you. So hopefully they enjoy it nearly as much as I know you will. Congratulations again, Matt Olsen.
Yeah, big congrats to Matt. I've known him for many years, top bloke, and I'm glad he'll annoy his family and friends with A-League Monopoly.
All right, next up, some Premier League. All right. It was a bit of a strange round in the Premier League overnight. There were 5 matches, including Friday night's game. None of them really were particularly interesting. Not interesting results, but there wasn't any scores that really you looked at and went, oh well, that's a particularly. I keep coming back to interesting. Um, um, what we'll do is we'll just press on through each of the results, though. Southampton, they hosted Leicester. This was obviously a rematch of the infamous 9-0 from almost 18 months ago. The Saints had Yannick Vestergaard sent off on 10 minutes for absolutely clattering the man after the ball. Southampton battled on and actually took the lead from the penalty spot before Johnny Evans equalised. Mate, the one thing I do want to mention about this game was the red card from Vestergaard. It was very reminiscent, I thought, of Balbuena's red card from last week. Did you catch the Vestergaard red card?
Yeah, I did, and I've got to say it's a little bit disappointing watching him do this because some weeks you watch him play and you think, geez, this guy's a really good footballer. He has the potential to kind of kick on a little bit. But then some weeks you watch him and he's just like a giraffe on ice skates, just doing silly things. And yeah, if he can get consistency, I think he can be one of those really good defenders in the league. But he's just a bit silly.
I guess there's a reason why he's at Southampton because, like you say, I know what you mean. Some weeks you watch him and you go, bloody hell, like this guy's immense. Like he is a really top quality centre back, and then other weeks he does stuff like this, or he's got an absolute clanger in him that he manages to wheel out about sort of once every 6 weeks or once a month or something like that.
And I could be wrong, but I believe he was on the books at Chelsea at one point. So that goes to show that he does have something about him. But yeah, someone needs to have a talk to him. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, mate. Someone once had to have that talk with me as well. Right, moving on to Crystal Palace. They hosted Manchester City. This was real business as usual areas for Manchester City. First half of the game, even though first hour of the game, even though City had rested a couple of key players, it looked like they might just sort of battle it out until later in the game. And it was pretty much right on cue on the hour mark when City scored 2 goals, one from Aguero and one from Ferran Torres that pretty much just put the game beyond Crystal Palace's reach. But like I said, real business as usual areas. And it was a game that Wilfried Zaha, he seemed to really sort of struggle getting into this game, and he looked very, very unlike his usual self.
Yeah, it was very similar in a way to Melbourne City's game against Newcastle because there was times where it just looked like, these guys in blue were just passing it between themselves, having fun, a training routine. And you're right about Wilfried Zaha. I was watching a bit of this one, and sometimes you'll just forget he was on the pitch. He just made that little of an impact.
Yeah, it was really disappointing, I guess, not just performance, but I guess the strange thing about Palace is at the moment is that a lot of them I think they've got a huge amount of their squad that's due for whose contract expires. Obviously, Hodgson, he's leaving at the end of the season. So Palace, like we could be sitting here in a couple of months' time at the beginning of the new season, and Palace, I think, are going to be a completely different side. So of a bit of a missed opportunity for someone to not stand up and say, hey, you guys need to sign me. You need to extend my contract and keep me on for next season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Won't be relegated. Brighton won't qualify for Europe. Leeds United in the second game of last night. Leeds looked a little tired after 3 really tough games against Manchester United, Manchester City and Liverpool in the past few weeks. And Brighton deservedly got all 3 points. Gross's penalty and Welbeck's icing on the cake second goal for Brighton were enough to see them get the win. Mate, I honestly don't have anything to talk about with this game, so unless you do, we'll keep moving.
I just want to quickly mention Danny Welbeck. He's done pretty well this season. He's put a few of the doubters to rest. He hasn't Like I'm not sitting here saying he's been like a Harry Kane or a Patrick Bamford, but when he's played, he's looked really well, and he's had a hard few seasons, so it's good to see him get on the score sheet.
He's saying he's looked like a Danny Welbeck.
Maybe Danny Welbeck of like 2013. He's got back to a little bit where he's not completely shit, but just a little bit shit.
That is a good description. I think he's a little bit good, a little bit shit, just real Danny Welbeck areas.
Like the Lockie Wales of the English Premier League.
Whoa! He's not that good yet. All right, mate. Chelsea, they hosted Fulham. Obviously, both teams actually had quite a bit to play for here. But Fulham were always going to be up against it, playing against a resurgent Chelsea side. Chelsea took an early lead through Havertz and extended it early in the second half. Chelsea, with one eye on the Champions League semi-final second leg, had Azpilicueta, Kante, Jorginho, and Pulisic all rested or rotated. And it meant that Mason Mount and Billy Gilmour, George's boy, Billy Gilmour, as the Chelsea double pivot. And I thought Billy Gilmour, I thought he did well, but Mason Mount, I thought he was, if not for Havertz's 2 goals, Mason Mount was probably man of the match for me. I thought he was really good in this. And I think I said it last pod that I thought Mason Mount was going to struggle under Tuchel, but I think he's really taken off, and he's probably one of the best English midfielders, I think, at the moment in the Premier League.
Yeah, I'd agree. What an outstanding player he is. When he's on, he's really something else. So next year, if you can find that consistency, or even this year, if he gets picked for the Euro squad for England, he could be a very special player in the future, and he could be even knocking on the door of a seat for the 2022 World Cup if he keeps it up.
And mate, that's a good point about the Euros, because I think he's definitely in the hunt, but I think Chelsea fans would hope that he doesn't get picked, because we've seen that this year has been a strange year, and that a lot of players haven't had sort of some of the rest that they normally would. And I think if players go to the Euros, it's only going to set them back for next season. So even if he if I was a Chelsea fan, I would be hoping Mason Mount doesn't get picked, and if he does get picked, that he doesn't play, because give the kid a break, and then I think he's going to be really, really good for Chelsea next season. My question from Sal, super fan Sal, he wants to know, are Chelsea just lucky frauds?
Oof, that's a bit harsh.
Bit of a loaded question, isn't it?
They say you make your own luck, and I believe Chelsea do that. I don't believe there's any such thing as luck in football. I believe whenever teams win a game or they perform well, it's because even if they're playing shit and they win, it's because they've got those players and that sort of belief. So to say Chelsea are lucky frauds is a little bit harsh for me. What about yourself?
I think I've been actually really impressed with Chelsea ever since Tuchel's come in. I think he's given them a real sort of mental strength, and a real sort of steel about the team that just wasn't there under Lampard. And they are I think over the last few weeks, I've sort of solidified in my mind that Chelsea are their favourites for me to finish 4th, and they could even catch Chelsea in 3rd. Leicester in 3rd. But also, they're at this point, they're my favourites to win the Champions League as well. That's how much I think they've progressed in the second half of the season. So, look, sorry, Sal, I've got to say, I think Chelsea are the real deal at the moment, and it's just I think Chelsea are they're in with a really good shout to push City all the way next season, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. That's the thing. We've seen how much they've turned the corner under Tuchel, and he hasn't really brought in any of his own players. He hasn't had a pre-season and all that sort of thing. So I would tip them as one of the kind of 2 or 3 favourites to push for that Premier League title next year, and I'll be really interested to see how they go.
100%. Mate, enough about Chelsea though. To me, I think Fulham are finished now. Don Hutchinson on the feed, he said that that late, he pointed out that the late equaliser from Arsenal last week, it's kind of broken Fulham's spirit. And obviously they had Chelsea this week, which they end up losing, and now they play City next week as well. So I just think it's Fulham now consider themselves relegated too. I think it's just too big a challenge now after they lost some winnable games over the last few weeks. which is, I guess, a little bit disappointing because they looked for a period there like they were in for a really good shout of staying up, but it just hasn't quite worked out for them. On the topic of Fulham, though, Scotty Parker, he's done a pretty incredible job, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I sung his praises last time I was on, and I believe that, he might not be the finished product as a manager yet, but you can see he's trying to build something. You can see he's got a lot of potential. And I think a team, even someone like Crystal Palace, they've got Roy Hodgson coming off contract. They should be knocking on Scott Parker's door. I think that would be a perfect move.
I agree, mate. We saw with Palace, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, where they went to Frank de Boer, who tried to introduce like this real possession-based approach at Palace, and it just didn't work out. It was too big a change too quickly. And I think going to Scott Parker, I think he's a little bit more, he's still a pragmatist like Hodgson, but I think I think he'd be a really good fit for Palace.
Yeah, and he's the manager who can get the best out of players. Yes. He's a manager who can get the best out of players. There's a few players for Fulham who, when they were in the Prem last time they got relegated, they played pretty poorly, like Anguissa. And Scott Parker's got the absolute best out of him. So if he does go to someone like Crystal Palace, I'll be very interested to see what he can do with someone like Wilfred Zaha, who, not to be harsh on him, he has a lot of talent, but he hasn't really been himself for about, maybe 3 seasons. Would you agree?
Yeah, Wilfred Zaha is just a really troubling player. You can see that he's got bag loads of talent, and we've spoken before about how he's a big fish in a small pond at Palace, and I think his window for going to a bigger club has closed. I think as he's gotten older, he hasn't matured enough to be able to go to a big club, and I think even now, like against City, you could see that they were doing little niggly fouls and things off the ball, and it was just enough to rattle him, and he just never really got into the game as a result. So yeah, I think the challenging thing for Palace is do they sell him now and hopefully get maybe 30 to 40 million for him and sort of risk the Palace fans' wrath, or do they stick with him knowing that when he's good, he's incredible. He's virtually unplayable. But when he's bad, he's actually becoming a bit of a liability for the club, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that.
All right. Somehow we managed to go back on to talking about Palace. Sorry. All right. One final game, which was Everton hosting Aston Villa. As I mentioned already when we were talking about A-League, Everton, if they had won this game, they could have continued to shoot back up the table and be within a shout of finishing 4th. But alas, Everton's faint hopes of finishing in the top 4 took a battering as they lost 2-1 to Aston Villa. Goals from Ollie Watkins and El Ghazi gave Villa the 3 points. And another really disappointing result, I think, for Everton. It really felt like this season there was a number of opportunities where if they had have taken those chances, they could have kicked on and maybe finished in the Champions League places. But this was a game that they had to win because it was, again, sort of a rival around the same areas of them on the table, but they just couldn't find the quality to and the concentration to take out the game. But that's Everton this season, or been Everton for many seasons, if anything.
I agree, and your point about the top 4, it's been spoken for, it feels like 5 or 6 years now, that Everton, this season's going to be the season that they're going to, make that top 4. This season's going to be the season. And it must be really tiring for an Everton fan to hear that, get that pre-season, the hype. This season really, to me, it honestly felt like the season where Everton were finally going to crack the top 4. They had Ancelotti, I had some good players, and they started off playing some good football. And they just fell short again. And yeah, I feel very sorry for Everton fans because it must be frustrating falling just short every year.
100%, mate. And to be honest, I mean, it's not due to a lack of quality in the squad. Like the quality is there, but I mean, and Mason Holgate, I don't think I don't think you consider him a really young player anymore. I'm pretty sure he's sort of 22 or 23 or something like that now, and he's probably approaching 100 games at the highest level. So for him to make that kind of mistake is kind of unforgivable. But I'm not really sure how you, like, without a wholesale surgery to that squad, how you'd improve it to make them into a top 4 team. It's just, I think that's just their level. It's just raw Everton areas.
Yeah, spot on.
All right, mate. Still 5 Premier League games to play this round, so we'll quickly pick them off and give a bit of a preview for each of them. First up, Newcastle hosting Arsenal. Newcastle coming off a late draw with Liverpool, while Arsenal will have one eye on their Europa League semi-final second leg against Villarreal later in the week. Who's your pick for this one?
I'm a Newcastle fan, and I was very hard on them last time I was on the pod. I said they had no chance of escaping relegation. They've really turned the corner, and I fully believe that they can beat Arsenal, particularly if Arsenal pick Leno over Matt Ryan, because he has been pretty woeful the past few weeks. What about you?
It's been really strange, the sort of the demise of Bernd Leno, because when he first came to the league, I thought he was incredible. I thought he was one of the best goalkeepers in the league because he was unlike Alisson or Edison. He was having to make a lot of saves, and then you compare it with it was also really good with the ball at his feet, but now he's sort of not always making the saves that you would probably expect him to. He's making mistakes, and he doesn't seem quite the same player as I think he got injured about 12 months ago, just before lockdown, wasn't it? And I don't think he's come back the same player. So maybe he just needs to get back into preseason, get his head right, and then hopefully he will come back a better player. But yeah, I don't disagree with you, mate. I think Newcastle have got a decent shout to get the result here. What's your score prediction?
I'm going to say maybe 2-1.
Okay. Next up, Manchester United are hosting Liverpool. Manchester United also have a Europa League semi-final to play later this week, while Liverpool are solely focused on making the top 4 to play Champions League football again next season. Mate, what's your prediction for this one?
Yeah, this one's a tough one to predict, as most derbies are. Part of me thinks that maybe Manchester United will have the one eye on the Europa League, but then again, they did beat Roma quite comfortably, so I'm going to go Manchester United. Maybe like a 1-0 win in a scrappy game. What about yourself?
I think it wouldn't surprise me if this turns out to be a really bad watch, because like we've seen Manchester United earlier on in the season, I think against it was Chelsea, and there was a couple of games where you just watched them thinking, oh, this game's going to blow up, and it's just turned out to be really dull. I think this has got 0-0 or 1-1 written all over it, to be perfectly honest. Again, sitting on the fence, mate.
Yeah, how are those splinters?
All right, next up, Tottenham are hosting Sheffield United. Ryan Mason gets a bit of a free hit here against already relegated Sheffield United. What's your prediction?
Oh yeah, this is another one of those ones where it's hard to predict. I know I've said that with pretty much every match, but Ryan Mason,
all hard to predict.
Ryan Mason, I think it's his first Prem match. He had the cup final and he got pretty tactically outplayed. So I'm pretty interested to see what he can sort of do in this one. Whereas Sheffield United really don't have too much to play for other than pride. So this could be one of those ones where Tottenham win comfortably, Sheffield United win comfortably, or it finishes 0-0. So I'm going to take a page from your book and sit on the fence and maybe go for a 1-1 draw.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Because this, we forget that this is the beginning of the post Mourinho era for Spurs, and they have Son and Kane, who are two players that they urgently need to hold on to, and if they don't hold on to them, they need to get silly money for them. I think Spurs fans would expect that they would get 100 million for Kane, whether or not he's worth it. Not my call, but I think Spurs need to hold on to at least one of those players, and they need to, I think, sort of placate those two players by getting some good results for the remainder of the season. And I think worst case scenario, I think at this point they can still get Europa League for next season. Obviously, it's not where they want to be playing, but if they do manage to continue the slide, there's a chance that they may not even make sort of, what is it, like seventh or seventh, I think, is still Europa League, or they could end up in, what's it, the Europa Conference League, whatever that bullshit new comp is called. So, mate, what's your... Oh, you've already given a score prediction, sorry. So, yep. Next up is West Brom are hosting Wolves. Black Country Derby. West Brom now, you could probably say that they're relegated, but mathematically they've still got a sniff. And their will hasn't looked quite as broken as Fulham's has in the last week or two. And Wolves, I mean, their season is pretty much done. So I think they got spanked last week. I think it was 4-0 by Burnley. So you know where Wolves' head is at right now. And just talking about Spurs and their managerial situation, Nuno's been linked with a move to Spurs as well. So who knows what the Spurs camp, the Wolves camp is like at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if West Brom actually get the 3 points here. And I hope that they do, because it will at least give them something to play for in the remaining 4 games that they've got. So that's my prediction there. Got anything wildly different to that, mate?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm fully confident that West Brom can win. You know, Wolves haven't been themselves for a while, and West Brom haven't been playing bad football. So I'm going to go West Brom, maybe 2-0.
Okay. Well, the final match we've got is Burnley hosting West Ham. I would have said probably a couple of weeks ago that this is a great match for West Ham, noting that they're still in the hunt for finishing in the top 4. But then Burnley sort of basically out of nowhere came off of an absolute walloping of Wolves last week. And West Ham have lost 2 on the trot now, which I think is the first time they've actually done that this season, incredibly. West Ham will have Balbuena back after his rescinded red card, and Dawson also returns from his suspension after being sent off at Newcastle. Antonio and Rice are also a chance to play, so I wouldn't be surprised if both maybe come off the bench. But I have seen waking up this morning that there is a chance that Noble's injured, so maybe Rice will be rushed back. Maybe Connor Coventry will step into the breach. Who knows? But it's a really tough one to predict, this one, because obviously Burnley have just come back off of a good result, and West Ham, I think they will be very keen to get a good result here, because this there's been a bit of a dangerous trend recently whereby they were starting off games really well and then conceding late on, and then they lost 2 in a row, and sort of you could make a case that the wheels have fallen off West Ham probably a little bit in the last month, but it's hard to know what to predict. What's your prediction, mate?
Yeah, despite Chris Wood getting a hat-trick, the first New Zealand player to get a hat-trick in the Premier League, I still like West Ham. I still think they'll win, but I'm hoping Chris Wood, maybe bangs in 1 or 2. So maybe 3-1 West Ham, just to throw a random number out there. What about your prediction?
That's not a bad shout, and I would be very happy with a 3-1 win, because I think a lot of people have basically closed the door now on the top 4, that it's Chelsea's now, but Chelsea have still got to play City, and they're also still in the Champions League as well, so they're still juggling multiple competitions. So still, I think it's still in the balance. I'm not confident that West Ham will get it anyway. I think there's still a chance that Liverpool could still sneak into the top 4, but I think 3 points here for West Ham would go a long way to West Ham staying in the hunt, though. All right, before we move on to the Champions League, we're into May now. It's the 2nd of May today on Sunday, so it means we've got an April More Than a Game Fantasy Premier League prize to give away. So Mace Caruana, he takes out the April prize. He's the first person to have received a second prize as well, so well done, Mace. Now, with the Premier League to finish at the end of May, it means we're very much at the business end of the Fantasy Premier League season, and not taking into account Saturday night scores. So yesterday, Mace Caruana is just 6 points behind More Than a Game's own Jesse, who's currently in the lead for More Than a Game FPL. Aaron Barker is in third place right now, but he's 28 points back. So it could be a little bit tricky for him to catch up, but still plenty of games to be played. So going to be a very interesting last few weeks in More Than a Game Fantasy Premier League. So good luck, everyone there. Well, let's move on to some Champions League, though, quickly. So, look, mate, there was the first leg of the Champions League semi-finals was played this week. We're really into Super Club territory now. The first game was Real Madrid hosted Chelsea. That one finished 1-1. Goals for Pulisic and Benzema. And really, at this point in the competition, you don't see bad goals anymore, do you?
No, and both the games I thought were pretty superb as well. Benzema is still proving why he's been, the most underrated striker in Europe for about 10 years. And it will be interesting to see what will happen in the next leg, because it's one of those games where both teams are big, like they really get up for these big games, and it's 1-1. So I can't really predict who's going to win this. I like the way Chelsea have been playing, so I think I'm just going to go for Chelsea. But then again, it's Real Madrid. It's the Champions League. This is their turf.
No, it's hard to see Real Madrid not winning this, but at the same time, Chelsea just have such grit and steel about them now under Tuchel that I think like even a nil result here is not beyond me, I think, at this point. So I do wonder if Real Madrid are sort of maybe coming towards the end of an era here and the end of a cycle. Even though Cristiano Ronaldo is not there anymore, I do wonder if maybe it's maybe they don't quite have enough big players there to sort of get them across the line. If Chelsea do get like maybe a couple of goals early on or something like that. So, excuse me. But yeah, it's a really tough one to pick here, and I think it's going to be a really close game though. Mate, I think I don't think either of us actually gave a score prediction. So give us your score prediction for the second leg and who's going to win the tie overall.
I'm going to say Chelsea are going to score a late winner, 1-0, and go through. What about yourself?
I think I'm going to say 0-0, and I think that will mean Chelsea will go through on away goals.
So we're both predicting a pretty gritty game then.
Oh, I think so, yeah. Which pretty much means that it's going to be like an absolute thriller, 3 or 4 goals each.
Exactly.
Right, mate. The other game was PSG versus Manchester City, the El Gasico or the El Plastico, depending on what's your flavour. This for me is really a game of who do you hate least.
Yeah, exactly. Both teams aren't very likable unless you're like a 12-year-old who's just getting into football. I thought it was a very entertaining game though, and I did say a few weeks ago that I thought PSG were going to win the Champions League, so I hate them less than City just based on that, because I want to have one right prediction.
Mate, Mbappe's out for the second leg of this one though. Who do you want to win, and who do you think will win?
I want PSG to win. I want to see them finally get a Champions League. I do like their goalkeeper, Keylor Navas. That's probably about it. But
he's been pretty hard done by in the last few years, hasn't he? Like he was just sort of shunted out of Real Madrid, even though he was one of the best goalkeepers in the world. And yeah.
So my heart says PSG, but my head is really leaning more towards Manchester City. What about yourself?
PSG, the plucky underdogs, huh? Yeah, I don't know. I really just want them both to lose, to be honest. I think I don't know. I don't really want them to. I don't want PSG to win, but I mean, at least Mbappe. Sorry, not Mbappe. At least Neymar's already won a Champions League before when he was at Barcelona. Whereas if City win one, then I don't know. I just don't want City to win the Champions League because it'll just be horrible.
And I just love the memes. I just love the memes whenever Manchester City don't win the Champions League. People are
Well,
just so hard on Pep Guardiola, always mentioning that he's a ball fraud. So I'm very excited for the meme. See if they come up with something new when City do get knocked out.
I can't wait for the fat filter to come out again for Guardiola. And I guess the other thing is maybe if like some people don't like Neymar, and like I said, he's already won a Champions League before. But I guess if there's one player that I do want to see win the Champions League, it's Pochettino. Or what? Sorry, one manager.
Yeah, yeah, I knew what you meant.
Thanks. Alrighty, mate. All right. Finally, let's finish up. Who do you think will win the second leg, and who will win the tie overall?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go for PSG with the double. It's just I'm not gonna sit on the fence. I'm just gonna say PSG. What about yourself?
I think because City won the first leg away 2-1, it's pretty tough, I guess, for PSG. I think they've really got to keep City scoreless. But if City do manage to score once, I think it might be too tough for them. I'm going to say a 2-0 win for PSG though.
Ooh.
But that pretty much wraps things up for this week's pod. Shanen, great to have you on the pod again. Really enjoyed talking some plenty of football with you. Plenty of football coming up this week. Like we said already, Europa League semi-finals, Champions League semi-finals. Still plenty to play for in the Premier League and, of course, the A-League as well. So look forward to tuning in with everyone again next week.